We are back this week for an episode of That's So Hindu that's a little bit different than the ones you've been viewing lately or listening to lately, and that this one's going to be audio only. Yes, I know that a couple weeks ago we went to all video, but for a couple reasons, which I won't bore you with, we're doing this one audio only. This is a special episode for Valentine's Day. Yes, yes, uncles, I know you're tutting us right now that Valentine's Day is some Western holiday and we shouldn't be honoring this as Hindus, but we need a publicity hook. So we're here today to talk about what we, in our discussions prior to this episode, are calling Kama before Moksha. Because desire and physical pleasure and all the things that are bound up in the concept of kama are important and have been underplayed, we think, by Hindus of all sorts, especially elder generations, many swamis today. So we wanted to bring you this discussion. I'm here with Vijay Satnarine from HAF and Kavita Pallod Sekhsaria, also from HAF in a different way because it's audio only. Why don't you both give us a little bio just so people can identify your voices and know the expertise you're bringing to this. Whoever wants to go first. Vijay, why don't we do you? We'll do staff first.
Okay, fine. So I'm Dr. Vijay Satnarine. I serve as a Senior Director of Education at HAF. Why I have some thoughts to share with you all today is perhaps because I serve as an Acharya also of one of the Hindu dharmas, and have also served as a Hindu chaplain in universities along with being a professor.
And Kavita, give everybody your nutshell bio here.
Absolutely. So I'm Dr. Kavita Pallod Sekhsaria. I'm a psychologist, and I actually really, really enjoy working with couples, especially premarital therapy with couples. And I think that, and being just a Hindu American woman in America right now, is my credibility today.
Okay. Vijay, let's start it off. You create a little outline for this episode here with, you were saying, reclaiming desire and Brexiting the puritanical mindset. What do you mean by that?
So I think it's kind of interesting when we get into the spiritual kind of search that we pick up books and we listen to podcasts and we watch sadhus, and we really try our best to kind of get to grips with what all of this tradition is, what all of the traditions are trying to teach, because even in that it represents a departure from normalized society. And if we're saying normalized society is like the Western consumer society that we find ourselves in, then yeah, even just picking up the Gita is a radical thing because it's so different. But when we're looking through all of that, we kind of also miss the fact that we're being handed something that's been reified, separated out kind of unnaturally, because we're looking at something that is purely focused on moksha most of the time when we think of spiritual stuff. If you were to do this exercise before all of the colonizations, however, you would pick up, teachings about dharma, about the ethics. You would pick up teachings about artha, about how to have a successful life. You'd pick up teachings on kama, which is how to have an enjoyable life or a pleasurable life, as well as moksha, the spiritual pursuit. And these would be given sometimes equal weighting. So why have we kind of jettisoned an entire quarter of what our ancients thought was important to know to live a successful and whole life?
So the idea then, to reiterate and give that back to you, as I understand it before coming into this conversation, is that to live that whole life, these four goals need to be in balance. And if you take one out of it, especially entirely, let alone just downplaying it, it's a recipe for imbalance and lack of fulfillment. Do I have that right?
100%.
Okay. Then why don't you go into this? I mean, what is the classical premise of kama for Hindus? What are we talking about here? Because people less informed are just sitting here thinking about the Kama Sutra in sex and fancy positions, and that's not. That might be part of it, but that's not the sum of it for people. Can you just unpack that for?
Yeah, it's not the sum
listeners?
of it. Exactly, it's not the sum of it at all. The word kama, it has the sense of desire, but it's like the full spectrum. It's everything from things that I want, whether that be a new phone or a new piece of technology, or where I want to be in life, that kind of kama or kamana, all the way through to love. Kama is actually a very old word that was used to mean love. It also means sensual pleasure. And so when we're thinking of kama, we have to think of it in a more holistic sense and a more complete sense, because what we've been given through the translations that we've been handed down is that the spiritual journey demands somebody to completely reject or claim victory over one's inner desires for sensual pleasure or just general pleasure in life. Yes, and for some people that is definitely the case, but for the majority of people, you're being told that you need to stamp down on karma in order to find moksha. And that kind of messaging is not only damaging to the person's psychology, it's actually disingenuous to the teachings of the tradition.
The psychology part, obviously, easy segue for there, teeing that up for me. Kavita, so in your practice in working with couples, how do you see some of these things that we're talking about and we're trying to break away from playing out in people's relationships? You know, this sort of mismatch of desire or downplaying it, or what are you seeing out there?
Yeah, absolutely. And I'll take a step back because I think Vijay did such a nice job of outlining this idea of balance that's so inherent to a Hindu worldview, if you will. And there's something about growing up in the US or just being part of kind of more industrial, Western, Abrahamic culture, however you want to frame it, where we just start thinking of things in more binaries, I think. And a lot of times it feels like this is true or that is true, but there's not a lot of overlap, right? And the way that this plays out is different in different places, but I think we're seeing more and more of this acceptance of the dialectics, if you will, in psychological speak of multiple parts of us like wanting to be voiced at the same time, and more of an acceptance of balance rather than like, if this is true, then that's not true, right? Like, I think when you first explain moksha and kama, people think they're just inherently in opposition to each other because kama feels like attachment in some senses and moksha doesn't. But being able to really unpack that with the Hindu worldview can be complicated, but also so fulfilling, right? Which comes back to, again, just the psychology of the work that we're doing with couples and sometimes feeling like, okay, what my heart wants and what my body wants and what my mind wants are all different, right? We always hear language like this, and it's like, okay, you have to pick what you want, but really, right, in an ideal world and in an ideal relationship, if we're using this one definition of like ideal love being, right, where you're bringing together intimacy with passion with commitment, is to bring all of that together for us and to stop thinking of things in such opposition to one another.
Just giving that a pause there to take that one in. It's occurring to me, Vijay, before we go on to some of these other items here I know you wanted to bring up, could you lay out what I mean, how do you define this? You say puritanical mindset. I mean, I'd argue that it's a little bit later than that. It's a Victorian mindset. You know, it's
Right.
like we're seeing the impact of the Victorian society intersecting with the Raj in India. Really, because it seems like that's when things got really off the rails compared to traditional understandings of this particular topic, at least. Am I wrong on that? The Victorians were great engineers, I like to say, but they were awful in the bedroom and on all these issues.
I mean,
So am I just lay that out for people? Because I know we're going to go into an opposite view, but I just want to make sure everybody's on the same page when we're talking about this, what you say is a puritanical mindset.
Exactly. I mean, when I was younger, one of the biggest flags that we had got the wrong end of the stick, so to speak, on this topic was I had been reading a lot of Upanishads and a lot of the Shastras. And then I took a trip down to Konark, the Sun Temple in Orissa. I'd taken, darshan of various temples in Nepal. And I couldn't understand about the fact that we were being taught that spirituality is this big, huge, pure thing where no desires are there. And then you rock up to one of these temples and you've seen the most acrobatic of positions that you could ever. I didn't even. I did not imagine them. As much as the modern world is full with all kinds of imagery and websites and all the other ways in which the modern world is open to at least have tongue-in-cheek conversations about these things, I had absolutely no way of understanding why a temple would have some of the most imaginative, positions on them, and also be what in the books were talked about as the places of the highest detachment. So when I'm thinking of puritanical attitudes, I'm not only talking about our attitudes to the understanding of what is sacred and what is profane, or what is damnable or condemnable. I'm also talking about the effects on how a human grows and matures and how they think about the world. What do people who grow up thinking about these things naturally, what happens to them when they're told that, no, you can't think about these things, and to think about these things are a sign of you being devilish and dirty and damned?
Yeah. You are sinful and lustful and all these, frankly, Abrahamic terms for these things.
Exactly. And I have to also right there acknowledge that the brunt of all of the damnable things that you hear in Victorian society are caused by women. And so women are now labeled as these, what do you call it? There's this archetype in Western society. I forget the name of the lady. Anyway, but they become this licentious being whose only job is there to pull, virtuous men off the path.
So you're talking are you thinking about like the Madonna Virgin disparity, whatever setup, or am I wrong on that?
I forget what it's called, but yeah, it's
Okay,
basically that idea. Yeah. And
okay.
it pulls basically just the last thing on that is it pulls on a certain strand of thought that does exist in ancient India, but but from the Victorian moment onward, we're presented that strand only as if that's the totality of everything that existed prior.
Got it. So let's take people back. If that didn't happen, if this Victorian puritanical, call it whatever you want, mindset didn't happen, how are these things lived out in Indian society, Hindu society? And Kavita, please weigh in on any of these from a more modern perspective, because I think Vijay is going to take us back here. So was this lived out? You say individual and mutual pleasure. What do you mean by that?
Yeah. I think so. First, is good to get a bird's eye view of what we're talking about. Dharma, Artha, Kama, Moksha, all of those four have scientific-esque investigations into what they are. You could go to a variety of teachers and learn more about each one of them, right? Different kingdoms, different republics, different spiritual traditions, they all had their own perspective on the mix of the four, whether the four was actually four, if it was just three, whatever it was, right? But if you were to take a common consensus, what was talked about as Kama was investigated by many rishis and munis. But they all said that the knowledge of Kama came from Nandi, as in Shiva's Nandi, who listened intently to the conversations that Shiva and Parvati had themselves. Right? Their conversations he distilled down into what was known as the original Kama Shastra. But what happened was, and this actual incident is recorded in the Mahabharata in the Adi Parva, in case anybody's interested. Shwetaketu, the name that we hear in the Chandogya Upanishad, Shwetaketu was a young boy, and he lived with his father and mother in their hermitage. And one day, a visiting scholar came, and after a while, Shwetaketu's mom went off with that visiting scholar. And Shwetaketu was getting to that age where he was understanding the undertones of what was going on. And Shwetaketu turned to his dad and said, Dalaka Aruni, Dad, where's she going? What's going on? And the father responds in a nutshell is that, well, don't worry about it. This is just how life is. Right? And so Shvetiketu gets so offended that his mother is happy to go off with this guy, that he decides to compose an entire set of revisions to Nandi's original statements. And he says that no, if you're going to enjoy the pleasure, it should be so that both people can feel fulfilled, but also that society doesn't crumble at the same time.
Mhm.
Few bits down the line, maybe a good, few bits down, a good 1,000 years later, nearly, you get, not 1,000 years, sorry, half a millennium later, you get Vatsyayana. And Vatsyayana, he is like, no. Now people are using sex as a way to control society in the Mimamsaka world, not anywhere else. So just a few of the 26 major empires that existed in ancient India at the time, we're talking about 6 only. So in those 6, people had started to realize that if you control who people can have sex with, you can fine people and make money for the kingdom if they do things that are wanton. Vatsyayana was like, yeah, we got to stop this nonsense. Everybody is entitled to have sex. So long as nobody's being forced, then sex is a good thing. And more importantly, you could increase your quality of life if you have good sex. So that's where he comes in. He links it in, of course, that sex is part of your pursuit of moksha, your fulfillment of dharma, and your pursuit of artha. But if you try to pursue any of those things without an understanding of where you sit with kama, you're going to fail. So that's kind of that's the broadest umbrella view that I can give. And then we can delve into pieces. But I want to hear from Kavita on how wild that sounds.
Yeah, no, it sounds wild, but it's also like completely intuitive once you like really think about even just human evolution, that we are kind of wired in so many ways to be largely monogamous, right? Just based on kind of what makes sense for resources, for kids and things like that, right? And I just find this idea of like controlling sex so profound because it is inherently such a vulnerable act, right? And that makes it, I think, just again inherently then easier to focus on than perhaps trying to find people for what they're eating or where they're exercising or something else trivial, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. And so, I mean, you see.
So I guess with that, let's move on to a couple items here. Maybe in the interest of time, we can combine these into one. And this is the part where some aunties and uncles and people who don't want to talk about these things in public so much are going to be blushing. So Vijay, you put down here, I'm just going to read them out. Experimentation and mastery, marriage, parentheses, husband trials, situationships, and adultery as an actual thing. Where do you want to get in on it? Start in on that.
Oh dear. I think with a preface is going to be important.
Okay.
Yeah, I think the preface is, building on what you just said. There was definitely ends of the spectrum, right? One end of the spectrum is do not pretend that you can control karma right off the bat without actually having given it good thought and being realistic with yourself, number one. And then to the other end, which is, well, if it's so natural, then I can do whatever I want and I can get it from whoever I want and I don't care what they say. That consent piece and force piece is absolutely the other end. It's been called ghoulish. It's been called, degenerate and something that nobody should do. And in a lot of the sources that survive from that time, they say that people who force and coerce should be put to death. So they were at least very, very clear about what that spectrum was like. Within that spectrum, though, you have to, those 3 strands you illustrated, Matt, were kind of emblematic of what was going on back at the time, too. You had the set of people who were very much into finding pleasure wherever they could find it. You had those people who are like, okay, but if you have responsibilities that you should be taking care of, i.e. a family, then those pleasures, as much as you're entitled to them, need to be rethought a little bit so you can discharge your responsibilities ethically and honestly. And then you have those set of people who are like, but you do it for a bit and you enjoy it for a bit, but then you get depressed, and the people you want you don't end up sleeping with. And if you do find somebody that you really, really want and they're really, really bad in bed, it gives you another set of distaste, and it's all very distasteful after a while. We just need to forget all of it and focus on moksha, right?
That sounds like a modern summary of people's dating lives, by the way, the whole spectrum right there.
Agreed.
And it's funny that all three, I mean, Nandi was like, here is a very scientific observational assessment of how different beings on this planet have sex, right? Shvetaketu is like, no. Now you guys are parents. You have to think about how you're having sex. Does it actually destroy the family unit? Because you're introducing so many different psychological issues that you might not be aware of the ramifications for everybody in the household, let alone yourself. Right? And then you have that third set, which is, well, once you've realized that there is basically no end to it all, and you're always going to end up in a situation where you're like, what the hell was that all about? Why not focus your time on moksha? And I think that's really, really intriguing. I think it's really intriguing that those three sets of things, you can find representation on mandir wall carvings. That there was this emphasis that if you are going to engage in sex, then do it with an eye to the pleasure of the other. And two, if you, did I go from A to 2? Anyway, that
it happens to the best of us, man. Let's keep going. A or 2, whatever.
Yeah. That B, if you are gonna, if you're going to do it, you should learn where to do it. Ironically, a lot of this was taught to, of course, age appropriate and stage of life appropriate in the colleges of the Vedas, for example. If somebody was going to get married and leave the Gurukula, they would be instructed in some of this. If a girl is going to get married, her mother would teach her these points and make sure she knew, but there was never even any expectation that you'd be what you call virgin before marriage, except in some traditions, some kingdoms. So this expectation that a person should know how to pleasure the person they're in bed with was there. The Kama Sutra was there as a kind of a compendium of what was done in that particular region. So Vatsena was operating in Pataliputra, which is around modern Bihar. Yeah. So what was common there? So there's just a lot of thought going on, a lot of depth of understanding, a lot of trying to understand the human condition that all evaporates once we hit the 1800s.
Yeah. So, and I can Kavita can come in here too. Vijay, I know you've counseled people in your acharya role in relationships, and you shared something that a good percentage of people, some of these pleasure mismatches and desires and pleasure and stuff are a factor in people's relationships to a shockingly high degree. When you shared this stat, I think you said 40%. I didn't think it would be that high. And Kavita, I know you've done this sort of work as well. Can you give both your perspectives on how people's lack of understanding of this today? It feels like all of this, we don't even have to be some fairly prudish uncle or auntie stuck in Victorian era mindset to be a little bit, this is a very private and sensitive and personal issue that it feels a little bit weird sometimes to be airing it out in public unless I don't know, it does. So how does this play out? What are you guys seeing, both of you?
Yeah, Kavita, what have you been seeing?
Yeah, no, I think it's really layered again, right? Because I think it's really standing out to me, like the ways that we talk about things and the ways that we feel okay talking about things constantly shifts, right? And I think largely, even as a couples therapist, when I ask questions about intimacy, people seem surprised. And I'm like, this is for your whole relationship. Surely sex is a part of it, right? I literally know you have children together, so let's put this on the table
Right.
and be okay with
Let's not deny that this has happened. And
yeah. And it's like even just being able to acknowledge sometimes that that's an important part of the relationship, and that if we don't address it, then we're missing part of what they're needing, right? Because most couples, I will say, that are coming to me, there's something they recognize they want to work on, but I think a lot of times, like, it is really hard when it feels like this is, again, the most vulnerable thing. This is the most private thing. We can't talk about it. So now I have no reference. I have no frame for what's quote unquote normal. And if, I can validate my own experience. So it becomes tough. And then unfortunately, like, what people think is the safest way to explore or understand ends up being online. And we all know, right, that world is incredibly distorted and incredibly problematic. I don't want to get onto my Jonathan high horse again, but when we think about like what's going on with young people and addictions and porn, like there's something there about the taboo of being real with each other, that's contributing to that. And I think that's important to acknowledge, right? I'm not asking for all parents to be the ones who are having every conversation about sex with their kids, but I do think that sometimes being in a place where, like, man, I do think I should be able to open up to some of my friends or something and get a better sense is an important part of the equation. In addition to, like you're saying, knowing that it's okay to talk about the mastery, the experimentation, that, just because you have moved into a certain phase of life, that you're not going to expect and prioritize pleasure at the same time, right? I think coming back to that initial idea of balance inherently meaning that one thing doesn't negate the other, that you can be really happy with your partner and still make an ask, right? Whether it is sexually or otherwise.
Vijay?
Yeah, that's such profound insight that mirrors a lot of the conversations that I've had when it's been in a more spiritual setting. I think when I'd said that to you, Matt, I'd said it in kind of a flippant overall observation kind of way, but I'd said that kind of jokingly that, a lot of the frustrations that people find in their marriages could actually be solved if they were able to pleasure each other a little bit better. I don't think that that's the
At
right
least
way.
it would be ameliorated a little bit. It makes things,
Yes,
it softens things.
exactly.
Yeah.
I think what I would have actually said if I was to give a better assessment is that some of the areas of friction can be exacerbated if there is dissatisfaction also in the bedroom. And I think that because of the way that the colonial experience has left its imprint in our societies, now we should not be blaming the colonials all the time, but I think very specifically in the case of Victorian mindsets, we were still very much swimming in that. The Western world is just coming out of it. It's gone to the extreme in some parts of its society, and it's gone the complete other way in other parts of its society. Right? But I mean, look, I have to guide people as they're going through, and I would rather not use the word guide, maybe just act as a sounding board for people as they're going through adolescence, as they're going through young adulthood, as they're going through first relationships, as they're going through committed relationships. And at all times, the conversation becomes so much more relatable once they can get into discussions that they have been told they should never have, basically. When they're asked about how they think about, their own pleasure, the pleasure of the people that they're with, whether they can even acknowledge the fact that they have thoughts in various ways, or do they have to present in a certain, stiff upper lip kind of way. It's just so it's so much of a watershed moment that they're able to finally discuss and understand pieces of themselves that were locked away. And it's actually this discussion on intimacy that is the key at some points. And you can really see why Tantra is regaining ground as a spiritual practice, because it's one of those spiritual practices that was forced underground by the colonials for so long that it's survived with some of these practices and thoughts and teachings and philosophies intact. So people have been able to, reintegrate thoughts about sacred sex, not the westernized version, but but the one with
Yeah.
integrity to the tradition. That one is still there.
Yeah, I think you opened up the door to another episode on Tantra and all of that, provided
Yeah.
that people don't come at us with pitchforks and pull all their donations after we publish this, which is a concern of mine. Please keep donating to HAF. We like our work and we're doing good work.
Yes.
So I'm cognizant of time here, and Kavita, I keep you long all the time, and I will not do that this time, promise. There's something out on our question list that I just want to put out there to bring it back, Vijay, to some other work we've done. Can you just give people a very quick summary of the third nature framework and bring this into relationships, both sexual and romantic or whatever, beyond, to use the language cis heteronormativity, which is a term I don't like, but let's just put it out there.
Yeah.
Also, Vijay, if
Go
you
for it.
need second, is it okay if I just comment on what you had said previously?
Please go.
So, I mean, I think this is so profound because we have the research to show that, right? When sex is good in a relationship, we don't think about it, and it doesn't rear its head in ways in other parts of a relationship. But when sex isn't on point and when it is feeling unfulfilling to one partner or the other, which happens so much, right? Because you have two different people with two different desires, two different libidos, two different lives coming together, then it does rear its head. And the problem is that because it is so taboo, we can spend hours talking about how the frustration is about the dishes rather than acknowledging that really we just want to ask for a certain sexual act, but feel really unable to do so. And so I think the repression that we feel comes up in a lot of different ways, even in how couples talk to their partners, and leads to just a lot of the issues we see.
Okay, let's give that the pause. That was a good follow-up. Thank you.
Yeah.
Vijay, quickly, because we are running out of time here and I've got a couple more things to go into. Lay it out for people, the other controversial subject in talking about this is the third nature framework and how people other than heterosexual men and women were traditionally seen.
It's really intriguing. If you go back into the codes that were available during the times of these empires, when we were talking about people actually wanting to control how sex happened. Again, only 6 out of 26 countries and realms. Please remember this, that there were so many other ways of doing things. But in a few of them, they wanted to make sure that land transfer from generation to generation was policeable. So there were lots of thoughts about who can have sex with who and how to have sex and blah blah. But the very strange thing is, as much as they were regulating things, if you were caught having sex in public and you were two guys, you would be asked to bathe in a pond and say sorry. So attitudes to non-heterosexual activity were a lot more tolerant in this part of the world than anywhere else. And two, just to underline that, even the Kama Sutra says that there are males, and you can understand by extension because of how much he talks about it, that there are females who, having found Kama with one another from lust to love as well, that live together in the cities as married couples do. So that comes from all that way back. There is a very different way of threading it together. It acknowledges that quote unquote hetero men will have sexual experiences with people of all genders because of either an innate desire, B, responding to stimuli, C, the act itself, or D, just wanting to experiment once and moving on. So it's a lot more open-minded back in those days.
Thank you for that. We're going to get some comments about that, as we always do when this topic comes up, but let's move on. A difficult subject, but I feel like it's related enough that we should be talking about it on this particular episode. That I like to call swamis behaving badly, or sadhu scandals. Vijay, you, in prepping this episode, you had a good explanation about this, or a good framing for this. Can you just go into that a little bit, explain it for people?
Sure. We have inherited a world that's very much based on Christian power structures and money and all that stuff. And so if you're looking at what role a priest played, the priest was expected to be this celibate person who's dedicated solely to advancing the church, but was therefore the arbitrator of power and money, and even how legal things would be settled, etc. So they had a lot of power. And the one way in the Christian world that you could get rid of a certain person like that is to find out what they were doing behind closed doors. So the note of clerical scandals is a huge, huge part of Western society. I 100% want to acknowledge as well that part of this also hinges on the fact that they can cause immense harm just because of how central they are in society. And we've seen that over the years of the Catholic Church scandals. In the Hindu Dharma traditions, by and large, that was never the case. Sadhus and swamis and swaminis, they were never given charge of vast infrastructures and countries and monies, etc., in the way that Christian clerics were. So what were they? They were simple practitioners. They were advanced practitioners, but they were human practitioners nonetheless. And there was in the olden dharmas a understanding that they're going to make mistakes, they're going to slip up, they might be trying to control karma, and they make a little bit of a I wouldn't even call it a misjudgment. I would say that they have not perfected as much as they thought. But our peoples were able to understand that, and we have stories galore throughout all of the epics with episodes such as this.
Yeah.
Why do we think?
Yeah. Sorry. I was interrupting it. I thought there was a pause. I could jump in and could finish your thought. I'm sorry.
Yeah, I was just going to say that. Why do we think that we have to hold our sadhus to that kind of standard, the clerical Christian standard, and at the same time be aware of the manipulation, those kinds of red flags type of people who just become a sadhu to have access to other people. So there's a double-edged sword. We need to be able to root out. Ooh. Are you okay there, Kavita?
Yes, sorry.
Well, I was just going to say, we have to be able to root out those kinds of sadhus, but on the other hand, we cannot turn into these people who are out there with pitchforks after people who make very human mistakes.
Right. I mean, there's a difference, though, I think, between making quote-unquote human mistakes and what can be seen as predatory behavior and lack of consent, to bring it back to a central point you made before in, as you put it, olden Hindu Dharma traditions. Kavita, do you have anything to add on that? Just observing, we've seen swamis scandals, prominent yoga teachers in the past decade and a half brought down because of inappropriate conduct. Anything to add on that, or what?
Yeah, I think I just feel like this comes up often, where like the fact that practicing Hindus are human the way that everyone else is human doesn't have to be an indictment of how faith is sitting with them, right? And I think actually what makes Hinduism profound isn't its ability to push people to be better versions of themselves. It's accepting people where they are and trying to at least I think and I hope in some of these like olden structures and understandings of power imbalances and dynamics to protect others from harm, if that makes
Right.
sense.
Right.
It does. It does.
Mhm.
Okay. Let's bring this back down to some practical steps for people going forward. How can I frame this? Vijay, you said, what about for normal people today? Let's be even more specific than that. I guess if you we're going to say to the average who's listening to this, an average non-Hindu who wants to take something from this, how can they bring this into their lives and relationships? Vijay, why don't you go, and then Kavita, you can have the final word here.
Yeah. In a world where we can understand dharma on its own terms, understanding that dharma wants us to, whichever one of the dharmas we practice, whatever Hindu dharma tradition we find interesting, that we do so with an understanding that requires our whole self to be present. It requires pragmatism, it requires acceptance, and it requires the desire to work with it as it is, not to sit there in judgment and say, oh, we shouldn't be thinking this. If I want to be a spiritual person, I have to be like this, that, and the other. It's about sadhana. It's about working on things over time with intention and with realism, not having expectations that suddenly you're going to turn into the next, avatar. So I think that's one part of it. That's the spiritual journey needs to be realistic. That's number one. Number two, that we shouldn't have unrealistic expectations of people that we're in contact with. Number three, that we should definitely bring back into the fold the fact that not everybody wants to be spiritual 24/7. And if we're not spiritual 24/7, then we have dharma, artha, kama to deal with. And if we're dealing with dharma, artha, and kama, then we should not, how do I say this without going too far into it? But it's basically, if we adopt Western binary ways of being, you will go further and further down the pursuit of pleasure and end up adopting what they do, which is the most taboo and the most dark parts of Western civilization was around slavery, slave owning, and how slaves were treated. And yet nowadays you find that the only way that you can be considered the master of pleasure is if you're be a BDSM master and choking people out and whipping people to their city. I mean, in certain places that's okay if that's where that person's interest is taking them, but to presume that that's the height of sexual experience is utter bullshit. I don't know if I can say that on the podcast.
You clearly can. You haven't been watching our other podcasts, which are
right.
cuss word after cuss word.
Right.
That is, you can totally say bullshit here.
Just to make that a little bit more rounded, it's what would then the highest pleasure look like for a person? The Kama Sutra, the Mahabharata, all of our ancient sources, they speak of a period in our life. Once you have education, before you really get into the responsibilities of having a house and kid and family obligations, etc., that period of life is to find out more about what does it for you. And there was no judgment to that process. There was a place to have those discussions. There were, if I needed to have this discussion with somebody who was elder in my family, I could go to them, and even if they were queasy at that moment about having the thought of having that discussion with me, they could still say, go and talk to so-and-so. They're going to be able to help you with that question a bit more.
Got it.
That's what I want us to be able to rely on as practitioners of Dharma, because that's what we were given by our munis and our rishis.
Great.
I love that.
Kavita.
Yeah. I'll build on that with just two thoughts, which are, I think, partially just what you said again, right? One of which is like for each of us to work on embracing ourselves wholly, right? To treat ourselves with love, with kindness, to feel like the parts of us that feel the rawest or the most uncomfortable, the ones that have been tabooed the most, are still parts of us that deserve our own love and attention, right? And so that means just a lot of acceptance of ourselves and all of the parts of our desire all around. And the second piece is like, and I think it's particularly pertinent today in 2026, is like talk to real human beings about sex in particular, but about things in general too. But, to really find the space to make it okay to explore how you're feeling and connect with other people and their experiences, feeling comfortable talking to um, partners specifically is really important. And I think we're at a place where it feels really tempting to do all of this privately and to try to seek validation and reassurance online. And that's really fraught. So talk about sex more is my awesome takeaway.
When I went into this, I thought this episode would be talking more about sex, but we talked about a lot of other related topics, and I hope this has been useful for people. I know it was a very interesting and useful discussion for me. So thank you all for watching, listening. Thank you for Vijay, Kavita for coming on at short notice to record this. And well, we'll see you on another episode of That's So Hindu very soon. Thanks again.